Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Admiral Hyman G. Rickover had a huge task in front of him: develop a naval nuclear propulsion program that will use the technology efficiently and safely for years to come. Now known as the father of nuclear navy, it is safe to say the mission was accomplished. During his career, however, he brought many into his sphere of influence and advised many other federal leaders and even presidents about nuclear power to make sure it gets the care and attention it needs. Now one of his longtime assistants has written a book about the life and career of the Admiral, who I jumped at the chance to speak with, seeing as how my own grandfather served under him in the U.S. Navy. I had the pleasure of speaking with Joann DiGennaro, who is the co-founder and now president of the Center for Excellence in Education, an organization the Admiral himself created.
I think what I tried to do was to show the personal Rickover, the man not just dedicated to engineering and the production of nuclear power in submarines, but a man who was a leader, a love of country, was so honest, passionate about things. And that's what I've tried to do in the book Rickover that was published just a couple of weeks ago and is selling very well, I'm happy to say, because it's not so technical.
Yeah, and, he built a nuclear navy that this was uncharted waters, pun intended, when he started. What sort of influence does his leadership style and the way he did things and the culture he built, how does that apply to the modern era of the U.S. nuclear navy program?
Well, we need more Rickovers in the service of our country. He was known to be honest, love of his country, focused, brilliant, and cared passionately about U.S. security and meritocracy, because there was so much danger in what could happen with sloppiness with nuclear power.
Yeah, it was that demanding, there was a reason behind all of everything that he did. Can you just talk about a little bit about more into the personal characteristics of how that was applied into his daily life? What was the relationship with his friends and family?
Everybody knew that worked for Rickover or with him that he had their backs. He was so honest and scrupulous about his passion and his focus. His leadership was one of a tenaciousness and grit to accomplish the goal, because national security was his goal. I guess I could give some examples of Congress went to him to speak about issues. They knew that he would give straight answers, even though the Navy had not approved him to speak to Congress. And now there are rules set up so no sailor, no admiral can just run in and speak to them. He had special relationships with the left, the right, and that was particularly what I remembered, how he handled getting funding for his submarines. Scoop Jackson was like his son. Proxmire always gave awards for silliness. And he was willing to speak to both sides because he had no political agenda.
Yeah, it almost seems as if he also kind of set the mark for military leaders that we see in those relationships with Congress today, and creating a dichotomy there where you're going to get a straight answer, but they're not going to wade into territory for anybody's agenda in particular. Do I have that correct, or am I oversimplifying?
He wasn't afraid to wade in. I think part of the problem with the Navy relationship with him is they knew he was going to tell the truth and that he was focused on the job he had to do. And I think, it's like our first time we went to the Air Force Academy, one of his first speeches after retirement, and he didn't care about the script. He said, I think they should have done away with this institution. I can't see why we need an Air Force Academy. I thought I'd die. I was behind the curtain. And then, of course, that was when John Warner called me in and said, why did you let him do that? And I said, Senator Warner, you worked with him for many years and you couldn't control him. How do you expect me to do it? And he laughed and he said, I think we need to try a little harder.
Yeah. Was that personnel? Was he we think of historical figures as if they're almost like an inevitability, as if, if it wasn't him, it would have been someone else. Was he really the right person for the right time for the nuclear Navy program at that time? I mean, he's trying to drive institutional change. Did it make it almost inevitable that he was going to butt heads with some of these leaders who didn't quite share the same vision and, just so he could drive home the points that he was trying to make?
I think that's an excellent question. And my answer is he was the right man, the right time. There could never be a Rickover that was the Rickover because of all the roadblocks in front of him. But he wasn't concerned about being an admiral. He just knew he had to work on the safety and the national security issues with the submarine. And, the Nautilus was built in 3 years. That I can't say would never happen again, but we don't seem to even be able to clean out some of our monuments for cleanliness and turning on water in the Capitol. That it takes roadblocks, it takes meetings. He did not suffer fools. And he was going to do what he felt was correct and get around those challenges. I don't think anybody could have done it better than he did.
Well, it's about having the right people to support you and reach your goals. And one of my all the stories that I heard from my grandfather growing up on the unique style that he had for interviewing candidates for joining the program. Everybody has one. What is your favorite interview story of Admiral Rickover and the way that he made sure that the people that he was bringing on had a good head on their shoulders?
I think in a chapter of the book, I talk some really fun interviews that he had. But I think one that I remember was the last one he gave to a student who had finished our program, had finished high school, and he wanted to go to the Naval Academy. And before the interview, I said, Kent, don't cry. It's going to be rough. And he said, I don't think I'm going to cry. Rickover was so hard on him. He came out shaking. And I said, it's all right. And of course, the Admiral said, you're not going to go to the Naval Academy. You don't have the right stuff. You didn't do the top of your class and work hard enough. And then he accepted the boy for his nomination. He was sensitive. He had a humorous side of him as well. But he recognized talent, and his people were the best in whatever field they were working in. And he couldn't have done it without his ability to look at a person and know they were the right person for the job.
Yeah, you have some unique insight there telling me that he had a sense of humor almost about it. Did he get a kick out of driving some of these people nuts? I heard about the chair that made you lean forward and making some candidates stay in a closet for a long time. Did he turn off the Admiral Rickover that we all know behind closed doors for you?
You know what's strange? People come to me and tell me about their relationship, their friendship with Admiral. He didn't have that many friends, and those people I would have known about in the history. But some of the stories about the interviews are remarkable, funny, like putting them in the broom closet for a couple of hours, like telling somebody, do something momentous, memorable, that I'll know you're really interested. and the person swept everything off Admiral's desk on the floor. And Admiral didn't laugh, but he said, well, that's memorable, but get the hell out of the office. I don't want you. But then he really did. And just what he also, in those interviews, he was trying to, he used to say, read their soul, because he wanted to know things about them that were just different from an ordinary interview. And he found those things by knowing himself. He was a vociferous reader of biographies and loved poetry. And so he would talk to them about their knowledge beyond engineering to see if they could accept challenges and use more than just a unilateral approach to meet that challenge. So, there is an interesting time, our visit with President Nixon. They talked about De Gasperi, the leader in Italy, Churchill, his interview with Sharon, his love letters with his first wife, poets, people that he admired that had nothing to do with the nuclear navy. Just, he appreciated, like the first time he said, Joann, there's a woman working at a museum that's an authority about seashells. Bring her in to talk to me. And I thought, seashells? That was Rickover. He was interested in everything beyond his brilliance in engineering.
Let's talk legacy, since that's what your aim, I imagine, is with this book. Where can we still see his stamp on the Navy today, or is it not as large as you would like? Because that style, everything is so bureaucratic now. There's no way that anybody could repeat that style of managing such a large program. Am I wrong?
I think that the nuclear Navy still holds on to the legacy of Rickover. I was in a senator's office yesterday, and there were nukes there from the Southern Virginia area on subs. And I listened to the legacies. They were talking about Rickover. He's alive and well because the nuclear Navy considers itself still as the cream de la cream and meritorious people in the field. And that was Rickover. That's how he selected them. And the submarine force is his legacy for meritocracy and safety. As you know, the safety with inspections, looking at the welds and telling Congress, yes, it's more expensive, but if something happened in the ocean, who would they blame? It would be me. And the Thresher had nothing to do with the nuclear component and the other accident either. And he talked about civilian nuclear power. His shipping port was the first one. But the problems, he said, with nuclear power will be the management. And people that work with the nuclear industry seem to understand all of this goes back to the Rickover rules of safety. And I've tried to say that in the book, but at the same time, talk about his compassion for his people. When the Thresher went down, he wrote personal letters to members of each sailor that was lost. When something happened, he stood up for his people, but they were really in Rickover's camp. So it's Rickover's people that were separate almost from the entire Navy.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, my grandfather used to talk about how first thing he asked whenever he would see him was, how's, he knew all my father's name, he knew my aunt's name, he knew everything, going on with his family life as well.
And you know something, with the Research Science Institute that we founded together, he really enjoyed being around kids and asking provocative questions and say, why didn't you do better? Who do you think you are? You think you're so smart, you're dumb. But he had fun. He played with them. And he wanted to nurture the best minds for the leadership of this nation. And this program, the center, is considered the gold medal of all STEM programs. He'd be happy, I think. He'd be happy. Well, he'd find fault with something, but it is revered around the globe as the most difficult but meritorious program, and we have not changed merit from the first program. He felt strongly. Lots of programs out there for kids, but the top ones are the ones that's the low-hanging fruit. Let's make them into maximizing their ability. And that's what we do.
I wanted to finish up by asking a more profound question of, he was he had such a curiosity about many things and a deep thinker. What did he think overall of the advancement of nuclear power itself and the power and also the potential destruction that it can cause? Did he ever divulge any of his thoughts on that to you?
Yes, but he also did it. The only interview that he granted, I was concerned because he would not, Walter Cronkite was the only one he'd ever done. So I had him meet Diane Sawyer. And of course he said, that broad's good looking. I'll talk to her. And he did. And he talked about nuclear power and his conversation with President Carter, who was a nuclear submariner. And he said, the president said, the admiral told me he wished there had never been nuclear power because of the demands it will take to keep it safe and the management of it and the influence of corporations to move fast on it and the Navy not wanting to spend the money for the safety. It was very interesting because he felt so strongly about the dangers that nuclear power could impose, but the ability to take it to the next level. And we see that now, nuclear power coming back after the debacle of Chernobyl and the concerns and the misinformation about 3 Mile Island, which there was not a nuclear power accident. So, the legacy of Admiral, I think, will remain alive because safety demands it. And but I am concerned that we don't have the people, even in Congress, who are willing to stand up and say, wrong, my reputation doesn't matter. I'm going to tell you the truth and what I think. Right now, I think of Rickover often and say, oh, golly, where is the young new Rickover? Let's hope they're out there. They'll show themselves because nuclear power is going to come faster and faster for use, as it must.
You speak to him speak of him as someone who is still alive and well in your own head. You worked with him for so long. Do you still find yourself saying, oh, he wouldn't like that or something like that day to day?
I do. Every day is a new challenge, and running a nonprofit that he started because he didn't raise money and I didn't know how to raise money. He picked up the phone to someone and said, give me $50,000, whatever. And I thought, oh, raising money is a piece of cake. He wants all our programs to be free. No problem. Well, he passed away. And in my book, I talk about one very famous corporate leader when I called him and he said, I wouldn't give a cent to the admiral and his he's a son of a bitch. And I won't give any money to his foundation. I hung up and I was shaking and crying. And knew, then it came about. We almost went under because of not knowing how to raise money, not having a champion. But then there were people like Schlesinger, Carlucci, Michael Jordan of Westinghouse, CBS, Frito-Lay, who carried me over the threshold. And now we're on a road to being self-sustainable. The programs are free. Their reputation speaks for themselves. And I'm proud that I can say it all goes back to Admiral Rickover, his leadership, and his positions of honesty, love of country, grit, and the importance of brilliance and nurturing it, as well as the lower quartiles, of course.
Joann DiGennaro is the co-founder and president of the Center for Excellence in Education. You can find this interview along with the link to more information about her new book at federalnewsnetwork.com.